Let me tell you about the time I had a brush with something not quite of this world. It was a foggy night, the kind that wraps around you like a cold, damp blanket, and I was hauling a load of furniture from Pittsburgh to Cincinnati. The route took me along a particularly desolate stretch of highway. I'd been on the road for nearly 12 hours, and the radio was my only company. Even that was starting to fade into static, the tunes barely cutting through the thick mist. The fog was so dense, it felt like I was driving through a sea of gray. My headlights illuminated only a few feet ahead, and even then they seemed to reflect off the fog, making it harder to see. I was running on fumes, both my truck and my body. My hands were tight on the wheel, my eyes dry and heavy. That's when I saw her. Out of nowhere, a figure appeared on the side of the road. I blinked hard, thinking I must be hallucinating from exhaustion, but when I opened my eyes again, she was still there. A woman, standing perfectly still in the fog, staring right at me. She was wearing an old-fashioned white dress, like something out of a different era. It looked too delicate for a night like this, drenched in mist and clinging to her figure. Her face was pale, almost glowing in the headlights, but her eyes were hollow, like they had seen something far beyond this world. I slammed on the brakes, my heart lurching in my chest. The truck skidded slightly before it stopped. I sat there for a moment, my breath caught in my throat, wondering if I had just driven into one of those horror stories you hear about. I told myself to drive away. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I didn't. Against all reason, I rolled down the window, the cold, wet air rushing in. "Hey, you need help?" My voice came out shaky, betraying my fear. She didn't respond. She didn't even blink. She just kept staring with those vacant, hollow eyes. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter as I fought the urge to hit the gas and leave her behind. But something about her kept me there. It wasn't just curiosity. It was like I was compelled to stay. Then, without a word, she raised her arm and pointed down the road. Her movements were slow, deliberate, like she had all the time in the world. I followed her gesture, squinting into the fog. At first, I saw nothing, but then the mist shifted, and I saw it. A car overturned in a ditch, barely visible through the haze. The front was crumpled beyond recognition, steam rising from the wreckage. I turned back to the woman, but she was gone. Not a sound, not a trace, just gone. My heart pounded in my ears. My mind raced. What had I just seen? A ghost? An illusion? Panic crept in, but I knew I couldn't just leave. I had to check the car. Maybe there was someone still in there, someone who needed help. I grabbed my flashlight, the beam flickering weakly as I stepped out into the freezing night air. The fog clung to my skin like icy fingers, and every step I took felt heavier than the last. The gravel crunched under my boots as I made my way toward the wrecked car. When I reached it, I could tell right away that no one had survived. The car looked like it had been there for days, maybe even weeks. The windows were shattered, the metal twisted and torn. Inside, I saw the remnants of someone's life. A purse spilled open on the seat, CDs scattered across the floor, a pair of sunglasses wedged under the dashboard. I shone the flashlight around, hoping, dreading, that I might find a sign of the woman. But there was nothing, just silence. Then I noticed something that made my stomach turn, a newspaper clipping pinned to the dashboard. I leaned closer, squinting to read it in the dim light. The article was about a fatal accident on this very road, nearly 10 years ago. The victim? A bride on her way to her wedding. My breath caught in my throat. I staggered back from the car, the cold night suddenly feeling even colder. It couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Was the woman I saw? Was she the bride? I turned to leave, but something made me glance back. That's when I saw her again, standing at the edge of the road, her dress fluttering in the mist. For a split second, our eyes met, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Then, just as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished into the fog. I didn't wait. I bolted back to my truck, jumped in, and floored it. The engine roared to life, and I sped down the highway, my hands trembling on the wheel. As I drove, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her again. For a moment, I thought I did, a faint, ghostly figure standing in the distance. But when I blinked, she was gone. I don't know if she was a ghost, a figment of my imagination, or something else entirely. But one thing's for sure, I never took that highway again. And every time I find myself alone on a foggy road, I can't shake the feeling that she's still out there, watching, waiting. What do you make of that eerie encounter at the abandoned rest stop? Do you think it was just a rundown place, or was something far more sinister at play? Have you ever stumbled across a location that felt wrong? Maybe you've had your own unexplained experience on the road. Share your thoughts and stories in the comments. I'd love to hear them. But don't get too comfortable just yet. Our next tale, The Phantom Hitchhiker, will take you on an even darker journey down an empty highway where the line between the living and the dead begins to blur. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. This next story might sound like an urban legend, but I swear it happened to me. It was one of those long, monotonous drives through the Midwest, where the landscape stretches out flat and unchanging for miles. I was transporting a load of electronics, heading from Chicago to Denver. It was around 2 a.m., and the highway was eerily deserted. The kind of night where the only company you have are the endless white lines on the road and the occasional tumbleweed blowing across the asphalt. I had been driving for hours, just trying to keep my eyes open, when I spotted something up ahead. A lone figure standing by the side of the road with their thumb out. Hitchhikers aren't exactly common in the dead of night, especially out here in the middle of nowhere. But there he was, a man in his 20s, dressed in a flannel shirt and jeans, looking like he'd been walking for miles. Now, every trucker knows the golden rule: don't pick up hitchhikers. But there was something about this guy. Maybe it was the desperation in his eyes, the emptiness of the road, or just the isolation of the highway playing tricks on me. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled over. He climbed in with a grateful smile, slinging his backpack onto the floor. "Thanks, man," he said, sinking into the seat. He introduced himself as Adam and told me his car had broken down a few miles back. He was trying to get to a small town further up the road. I introduced myself in return, and for the next few miles, we made small talk about the road, the weather, and the monotony of cross-country driving. But as we drove further down the highway, something shifted. The conversation faded, and a strange feeling crept over me. The air in the cab felt colder, and a faint, musty smell, like damp earth, began to fill the truck. I glanced over at Adam, and he was just staring straight ahead, not blinking, not moving. His silence was unsettling. Then, out of nowhere, he spoke. "Thanks for stopping," he said, his voice distant and low. "You're the first person who's picked me up in years." The way he said it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he spoke, like he wasn't really there. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the unease. "Well, you're lucky I came by," I said, glancing at him again. And that's when my blood ran cold. Adam was gone. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. I whipped my head around, expecting to see him still in the seat, or maybe outside on the road, but there was nothing. The passenger seat was completely empty. I hadn't heard the door open, hadn't felt the truck shift. He was just gone. I pulled over to the side of the road, jumped out, and looked around the truck, my breath visible in the now freezing air. There were no footprints, no signs that anyone had been there. The road was empty, silent except for the wind whistling through the fields. Shaken, I climbed back into the truck. That's when I noticed it. On the seat where Adam had been sitting was a faint outline, like someone had been there for a long time. The smell of damp earth was even stronger now, filling the cab, clinging to the air like something dead and decaying. With shaking hands, I restarted the engine and hit the gas, not stopping until I reached the next town. I drove with the windows down, trying to get rid of the smell and the cold that had somehow seeped into my bones. I didn't stop until I reached Denver, and even then, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Later, I found out that the stretch of highway where I picked up Adam was infamous for ghostly sightings. People claimed a man had died hitchhiking after a car crash years ago, never making it to his destination. They said he still roams the highway, looking for someone to give him a ride home. I'm not sure what I believe. But after that night, one thing is certain. I'll never pick up a hitchhiker again. This last tale is one that still makes my skin crawl, even though it happened years ago. I was driving through the Appalachian Mountains, making a delivery from Richmond to Louisville. The route was scenic but lonely, with winding roads and dense forests on either side. It was late, probably around midnight, when I realized I was running low on fuel. Not the best situation to be in, especially in the middle of nowhere. I spotted a sign for a rest stop a few miles ahead and decided to pull in, hoping to find a gas station and maybe grab a quick bite. As I approached, the place looked like any other rest stop, dimly lit with a couple of vending machines and a small convenience store. But there was something off about it. The parking lot was empty, and the whole area felt abandoned, like it had been forgotten by time. I pulled up to the pump, but as I stepped out of the truck, I noticed the pumps were ancient, the kind with manual dials. No card readers, no modern conveniences, just dusty old machines that looked like they hadn't been used in years. Still, I needed fuel, so I tried to pump some gas. Nothing happened. The pumps were completely dead. Frustrated, I decided to check out the convenience store. Maybe there was an attendant who could help. The glass doors were covered in grime, and inside it was dark except for a flickering fluorescent light in the back. I pushed open the door, and the musty smell hit me, like mold and stale air. The shelves were half empty, stocked with expired snacks and faded magazines. It looked like no one had been there in a long time. "Hello!" I called out, but my voice echoed in the emptiness. There was no one there. I wandered down an aisle, the floor creaking beneath my boots. The whole place felt wrong, like a scene from a horror movie. I grabbed a pack of chips, more out of habit than hunger, and made my way to the counter. That's when I saw it. A bell, the kind you see in old hotels. I rang it, the sound sharp and jarring in the silence. Nothing. No response. I rang it again, harder this time. Still nothing. Then, from the corner of my eye, I caught movement. I turned and saw a figure standing at the end of the aisle, partially hidden in the shadows. It was a man, dressed in what looked like an old uniform, staring at me with a blank expression. I hadn't seen him come in, and there was something unsettling about his presence. Excuse me, I need some help with the pumps," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man didn't respond. He just stood there watching me. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. I was about to repeat myself when he finally moved, stepping out of the shadows. His face came into the dim light, and I saw it was pale, almost gray, with dark circles under his eyes. He looked off, like he hadn't slept in days. "Pumps don't work," he said, his voice raspy and hollow. "Haven't worked in years." A chill ran down my spine. "Then what's this place still doing open?" I asked, trying to mask my unease. He shrugged, a slow, eerie movement. "People pass through. Sometimes they stay." The way he said it sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I felt an overwhelming urge to leave, to get out of that place as fast as I could. I dropped the chips on the counter and backed away. "I'll, find gas elsewhere," I muttered, heading for the door. As I reached the exit, the lights in the store flickered, and for a split second, everything went dark. When the lights came back on, the man was gone. The store was empty again, silent as a tomb. I bolted out the door, heart racing, and jumped back into my truck. As I sped out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The rest stop stood dark and empty, no sign of the man or anyone else. I didn't stop until I found a well-lit gas station miles down the road. The whole experience felt like a bad dream, but I knew it had been real. I asked around later and found out that the rest stop had been abandoned for years after a string of strange incidents. They said the last attendant disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only an eerie silence and a haunting presence. I don't know what I encountered that night, but I've never stopped at an old rest stop since. Some places are just better left alone. If you want to see more horror stories, check out my next video.